So how does the Eurodollar drive inflation? And what's particularly happened over the last, couple of years that has led to the current high rates of inflation? Because there is a correlation between global pandemic, massive amounts of stimulus, and high inflation. That story, that narrative, it makes sense. It's logical. Well, but you're saying it's not that. You're saying it's Eurodollar. So how is it the Eurodollar that's caused that?
So we've been hearing that ever since the first quantitative easing in the United States back in 2009. They're going to destroy the dollar. They're printing money. Inflation's going to get loose, all this stuff. That didn't just start in 2021. That goes back to 2009. So the Fed doing all that stuff, we did not see any of those things happen. In fact, the dollar has only gone higher. We've seen disinflation, lack of economic growth, lack of recovery up until 2021. So something changed in 2021 that was different from how everything had performed before. The thing that changed was not quantitative easing, nor was it actually government intervention. What actually changed was, as you said, the pandemic, which created all sorts of supply bottlenecks and restrictions. What we've seen over the last year, even today, the CPI report that was just released, which was another 40-year high, is not money printing. It's not even inflation. It's simply a supply shock. The difference between small E economics of an inelastic supply curve and a rightward shift in demand, a temporary rightward shift in demand. The only way to balance those two curves is if prices go higher.
Right.
So if more people demand a product and I'm not able to supply as many products as is demand, I can charge more for that same product. Even though I'm selling less of that product, I'll make more money.
So it takes me back to that, there's that YouTube video, like about how a pencil's made. It's like nobody knows how to make a pencil. Have you ever seen it?
Is that from the poem?
I don't, it might be, but and it basically goes through every part of a pencil because there's rubber, there's graphite, there's wood, but then it talks about every element of getting it together. So like where the people who cut the wood trees and then cut it into the smaller part. Like no one person can make a pencil because there's hundreds of people in the supply chain that come together to create the simple pencil. And therefore, with the pandemic, when you close down an economy, you have a lot of issues. So, for example, right now, when I flew out here, we sat on our flight was delayed an hour, and then we sat on the runway for an hour because they didn't have enough baggage handlers to get the bags through and put them on the plane. And the airport have asked the airlines to cancel thousands of flights because what happened was during the pandemic, they let the baggage handlers go. And there's that time delay period, that lag from finding people who want the job, getting them security clearance to allow them to do the job. Okay, so you spread that through the whole economy. You've got lots of little, lots of little pressures on parts of the supply chains.
Inefficiencies.
And I guess that's, if you close the global economy down for a year and a half, 2 years, you're going to create lots of breakages, and that's just going to take time to fix. And then the time that takes to fix, those pressures are going to have going to push prices upwards.
Right.
That is what you're saying.
It's a supply shock.
Okay, it's a supply shock.
And it's actually worse than that because it wasn't just we shut everything down, let everything come back. It's we shut everything down, started to come back, shut everything down again, started to come back. Some places shut down, other places didn't, and then there were all sorts of other frictions and inefficiencies on top of feedback effects, which just made it that much worse. So the pandemic is what changed, not the Fed or QE or any of the other things. And if you look at the actual financial statistics that come from the Federal Reserve, by the way, you won't see any money being printed. What you'll see is gross credit across the U.S. economy, including a massive proportion that comes from outside the U.S. economy, denominated in dollars because it's the Eurodollar system. There is a parabolic rise up until 2008 and then flat since. And there was no break in 2020 except for the federal government liability, which obviously exploded when the fiscal deficits from the CARES Act forward.
Danny, can you try and find a 20-year inflation chart? I want to see from 10 years prior to 2008 crisis through the 2008 crisis right up till now, because that would be super interesting because lots changed in that period. And if inflation was fairly stable, the version of events you're telling me also makes sense. So are you also one of those people that I had Stephanie Kelton on the phone, the MMT expert? A lot of people, So here we go.
See how it went lower after 2008? So then persistently lower despite the Fed supposedly printing money.
So in 2000 so that's 2008, 2009.
You can just see the
But it's
The
been fairly
average shift
steady.
before
We can actually go
2008,
further
and you
too.
can you actually see it better when you look at bond yields.
Hold on.
which
So
are
where's
inflation
so your 20% was at about 1950. Okay, that's post-war.
You can actually see the Eurodollar system come online. Look at how the behavior of the CPI changes
Okay.
around 1955.
But I want to follow your logic. Okay, so during that war period, we had high inflation. The highest inflation looks to me
About 20.
looks like it's probably the 5 years after this end of the Second World War.
And that wasn't money printing either.
No,
that was a supply shock after the post-war. The European economy came up. There wasn't enough supply. We were still rebuilding, still retooling after the war.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's like the
same thing we're experiencing now.
What happened in 1980?
1980 was the Great Inflation.
What is that?
The end of the Great Inflation. You have the first phase of the Eurodollar system between the middle 50s and 1980, where it just got crazy. And eventually it fell apart because you have losses built up in the system. You have the Latin debt crisis, for example, where banks sort of just, by 1980, they had done too much and sort of took a 2-year break.
Okay, just for people listening on the podcast who can't see, or not watching the YouTube and don't see this. So this is the interesting thing is that from, let's say about 1985 to about 2008, inflation would range between about 1 and 5%, but generally between about 1 and 3%, fairly consistency, the odds spike out. Then there's a spike up of inflation to about 5% that looks like that was right at the start of the financial crisis, and then it's gone down to about minus 2%. So the 2010, the year that followed the financial crisis, we actually had deflation.
It was 2009, yeah.
But there was also massive stimulus at that point.
It didn't stimulate.
Well, it didn't cause inflation, but is that because
that's because
global financial crisis, people just bought less shit?
No, it was obviously the economy got hammered globally, but we also have a change in monetary behavior. You had the Eurodollar no longer providing liquidity, providing enough money throughout the Eurodollar system, which created that deflation and defeated the purpose of this psychological bullshit from the Federal Reserve and the federal government. And the federal government's stimulus isn't really stimulus as much as it is a temporary redistribution of resources. So it's not like the federal government is adding more to the economy. They're sort of taking it from some parts and giving it to others, which is incredibly inefficient, as the Japanese can attest to over the last 30 years. More government intervention leads to more deflation down the road because it creates more inefficiencies across the economy.
Danny, what do you think, man? Because this is a complete departure from every conversation we've had in the last year. But don't bear with me. I'm like, it also makes sense, and history also shows that.
Well, let's talk about history.
Yeah,
there's an easy way to settle this.
Hold on.
Would you characterize the Great Depression as inflationary?
I mean, I don't really remember it.
But what you've heard about it, what everybody says about it, it's the opposite, right? It's deflationary.
Yeah.
What happened to interest rates during the Great Depression?
I don't know. They went up?
They went down.
Oh, they went down. Okay.
See, you think that they would go up because you're taught higher rates you associate with tight money.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. Because what we're talking about is what we can see. And what we can see in the monetary system, financial system, is interest rates falling are due to the most traded, most liquid assets, which happen to be government bonds. And government bonds are safe and liquid. So when the demand for safe and liquid goes up, interest rates fall. What has happened? What can we say about the environment if demand for safety and liquidity is high? It's consistent with the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So the Great Depression, deflation, lack of money, interest rates fall. What has happened to interest rates over the last 15 years?
Gone to zero and sometimes negative.
Demand for safe and liquid is through the roof. What does that tell you about safety and liquidity, regardless of the level of bank reserves created by the Federal Reserve? The Eurodollar system has broken down, and the Federal Reserve does QE because it wants to try to fix it through this psychological manipulation that doesn't work. So the market is already telling you, and I know the counter argument is, well, interest rates are low because central banks buy bonds. Well, even the central banks themselves would tell you that's not how it works. So interest rates have fallen because demand for safety and liquidity remains as high as ever, which tells you the monetary system itself is telling you that we want safety and liquidity. We don't want to lend. See, that's the part you don't see. Because interest rates to local mom and pop businesses are infinity. They can't get loans if they wanted to. because safety and liquidity are what is demanded by balance sheet or by banks, which is when we go back to the quantitative easing transaction we talked about. This is why banks will sell a safe liquid bond to the Fed and they go in the market and replace it with a safe liquid bond. They don't go and lend because they don't want to lend. The liquidity and safety environment says safety and liquidity, otherwise you become Bear Stearns.
But we're sort of told that QE is adding liquidity to the market. But if that's
By
not
who?
But if that's not the case,
Well, that's the thing. Who's telling you that?
well, I mean, it's just
You can't actually get, other than Jay Powell on 60 Minutes in May of 2020, central bankers won't even say that because they know it's not true.
okay. So how does the Eurodollar market put liquidity in the system?
By balance sheet expansion. It's the same way that you would have liquidity during under a fractional reserve system. How does a fractional reserve system work? You put cash in a vault and then create loans based on different claims on the same cash. Well, you can do the same thing just from eliminate the reserves. You don't need cash, you just create different claims based on whatever internal functions or goals you're seeking.
It's a lot to follow. You get it, don't you?
It is a lot to follow, but I think so.
That's the thing. This is not something that's easy. It's really hard to get
Hold on. Are we saying the Eurodollar drives inflation, or are we saying
Yes.
supply shocks drive inflation?
Well, because what we're actually experiencing now is not inflation. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. What we're experiencing is consumer price acceleration due to the supply shock.
Right. Okay.
So I know people, you're just splitting hairs, right?
But would you say then, therefore, would you see the prices eventually come down?
Yes,
Oh, so you do think it's transitory?
absolutely. So does the market. So does the monetary system.
So I can see that on gas prices. I could fully understand that petrol prices in the UK because we had a change in the energy markets with the war, and we're seeing it. The price of the barrel of oil price is falling. So we would expect that to happen at the gas pumps, or they never seem to bring it down. It's almost like
Well, there's no one-to-one.
well, it's almost like they realize, well, people are still buying their fuel. We'll just keep our prices
as
up.
economists will say, prices are sticky.
Yeah.
So if they go up in a certain amount, when we say it's deflationary or transitory, it doesn't mean that the prices are going to go back to where they were. They may go back to where they were, but it'll take a long time for that to happen. But what usually happens is prices go up and then they kind of stay there.
Right.
And then they stay there and then they stay there, and growth kind of meets where prices had been beforehand.
And this is the thing where people confuse inflation with price increases.
Yes.
Inflation
It's not always.
Yeah. You can have a price increase without inflation.
Yes.
And then you can have price increases with inflation.
So like you were showing, that 1946 massive spike in consumer prices was not inflation. That was a supply shock based on restricted supply and growing demand, exactly as we're seeing today. So we would expect, despite the fact that the CPI went higher today in the United States and it's likely to do in Europe, that yes, consumer price acceleration is transitory because it's not monetary inflation.
You're saying some controversial things today, man.
I'm only saying what the markets, what the
No.
money system, what the data, what the evidence tells me.
And it makes sense.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to forward it all to Lynn Auden. Say, Lynn, can you listen to this? What do we think? Okay, right. So